In a shocking development that could shake up how Britons use their cars, the government is reportedly planning to scrap fuel duty altogether, replacing it with a controversial pay-per-mile tax system. This drastic shift, expected to be revealed in the upcoming budget by Chancellor Rachel Reeves, is seen as the government's response to a looming £25 billion tax shortfall as the UK transitions towards electric vehicles, EVs. As fuel sales plummet with more people switching to electric cars, the Treasury is losing a major source of revenue, forcing the government to explore radical alternatives like taxing drivers per mile travelled on UK roads. For decades, fuel duty has been a cornerstone of the UK's tax system, generating billions in annual revenue. But with the government pushing hard for net zero emissions and encouraging the widespread adoption of EVs, the income from petrol and diesel sales is drying up fast. Industry experts warn that if no alternative tax measures are implemented, the Treasury could face a £9 billion revenue loss by 2030, skyrocketing to £27 billion by 2040, an amount that could halve the country's defence budget. The proposed pay-per-mile tax is now being seen as the government's preferred solution to fill the gap left by the decline in fuel duty. Under this system, drivers would be taxed based on how many miles they drive, rather than how much fuel they use. According to PwC, this model is already being tested in countries like Iceland and New Zealand, where EV adoption has reached critical levels, and road users are required to self-report their mileage and pay taxes digitally. With the UK expected to have 50% of its cars running on electricity by 2035, the government faces the challenge of replacing the billions lost from declining fuel sales. Grant Klein, PwC's UK transport leader, explained the difficulty of balancing the nation's environmental goals with its fiscal needs. "There's a circle that's hard to square," Klein said. "On the one hand, net zero objectives point to needing to incentivise the purchase of EVs, and on the other, there's an impending black hole from the reduction in fuel duty as more people switch to electric cars." Caroline Bevan, ESG tax leader at PwC UK, described fuel duty as a dead tax, pointing to the rapid decline in revenue it generates as EVs become more popular. Bevan believes the pay-per-mile system is the natural successor to fuel duty, offering a fairer system where drivers pay based on how much they use the roads, rather than simply what kind of vehicle they drive. However, Bevan also acknowledged that introducing this tax won't be easy. "You can't just switch overnight," she said, noting the operational and technological challenges involved in implementing such a system. But despite these challenges, sources indicate that the government may begin laying the groundwork for this system in the upcoming budget, and the shift could happen as early as 2028 to 2029. This timeline reflects the urgency of the situation, with fuel duty revenue disappearing faster than predicted. One of the biggest concerns is the financial burden this new tax system could place on ordinary drivers. According to the electric car scheme, the pay-per-mile tax could see drivers paying up to 15 pence per mile under the proposed system, representing a significant increase in costs for those who rely on their cars for daily commutes, errands, and family activities. For rural drivers and those living in areas with limited public transport, this could result in a massive financial hit. Tom Groot, CEO of the electric car scheme, described the potential pay-per-mile system as a significant shift in how Britain taxes road users. Under current regulations, motorists are taxed based on emissions, with higher rates for petrol and diesel vehicles, while EVs enjoy reduced tax burdens. However, the pay-per-mile tax would change this structure, charging drivers for how much they use the roads, regardless of the type of vehicle they drive. Proponents argue that this system is fairer as it reflects actual road usage, but critics worry that it will disproportionately affect those who have no choice but to drive long distances. But it's not just motorists who are in the government's crosshairs. The looming budget could also bring bad news for the country's pensioners, as Rachel Reeves is reportedly considering extending the income tax threshold freeze. Initially put in place by the Conservative government and set to continue until 2028, this freeze means that as incomes rise with inflation, more low-income earners are dragged into higher tax brackets. Now, Reeves is rumoured to be extending the freeze until 2030, potentially pulling 1 million additional pensioners into the tax system. The income tax threshold freeze currently stands at £12,570, meaning that income above this amount is taxed at 20%, and the threshold for higher rate tax, 40%, is set at £50,271. With the state pension set to rise to £11,975 in April due to the triple lock, more pensioners will find themselves approaching or surpassing the tax-free threshold. This situation could lead to unexpected tax bills for many who have never had to pay income tax before, placing further strain on older Britons already struggling with rising living costs. A recent analysis by wealth manager Quilter revealed that the extension of the threshold freeze could drag up to 1.5 million pensioners into the basic tax rate band, while those already paying tax could be pushed into higher brackets. The freeze is expected to raise £7 billion a year for the Treasury, but critics argue that it disproportionately affects low-income pensioners who may not have the financial flexibility to absorb these additional costs. John Greer, head of retirement policy at Quilter, described the freeze as a stealth tax that is slowly turning the income tax system into a burden for those on the lowest incomes. Thresholds that are meant to shield lower earners are stealthily morphing into a tax burden for those on the lowest incomes, Greer said, warning that the extension of the freeze could make financial planning much more difficult for pensioners. He emphasized that many retirees could be blindsided by new tax bills as their state pensions rise while the thresholds remain frozen. The potential extension of the tax freeze also raises questions about Labour's commitment to its manifesto pledge not to raise income tax, VAT, or national insurance on working people. While technically the freeze is not a tax rate increase, the impact of dragging more pensioners into the tax system could be seen as a betrayal of that promise, sparking a backlash from voters. As the budget announcement looms, the public is left waiting to see how Rachel Reeves will address these pressing issues. The proposed paper mile tax and the income tax threshold freeze both represent significant shifts in how the government raises revenue, and both are likely to be deeply unpopular with motorists and pensioners alike. For drivers, the replacement of fuel duty with a paper mile system could mean facing much higher costs simply to get from A to B. For pensioners, the extension of the threshold freeze could bring unexpected tax bills that chip away at their already limited income. Both groups could be hit hard by the government's need to balance its books, but the broader question is whether these moves will make life even more difficult for Britons already grappling with a cost of living crisis. With the government facing a £27 billion shortfall in tax revenues by 2040, drastic measures are inevitable. The transition to electric vehicles, while a positive step for the environment, is wreaking havoc on the Treasury's finances. Fuel duty is no longer sustainable, but the paper mile system and tax threshold freeze are being viewed by many as the wrong solutions at the wrong time. As the country braces for these potential changes, Rachel Reeves's budget could mark a turning point in how Britons pay for their roads and how they navigate the financial realities of retirement. Will the Chancellor's decisions lead to fairer systems of taxation, or will they spark outrage among millions of drivers and pensioners?